Hey guys, welcome to my latest Hearthstone deck, which in this case is the Mill Rogue. So what is a mill deck? A mill deck is a deck where we essentially are going to force our opponent to draw through his or her deck really rapidly and run out of cards. And once you start running out of cards, you start taking damage every time you draw a card and you don't have anything left in your deck. Firstly, you take 1 damage, and then next card draw, you take 2 damage when you stop being able to draw cards. So essentially, we have a lot of cards in this deck that forces our opponents to draw cards. We also have a fair few amount of control cards aimed at stopping our opponent's aggression. Because when you go against a mill deck, the way we can lose with this deck is if our opponent manages to overwhelm us with their minions. So we have also a lot of control spells and damage spells and spells that return the cards to our opponent's hand to slow them down. And if we can get our momentum and force our opponents to draw a lot of cards in succession, usually there's not much that they can do about this kind of deck. So I'm going to run through all the cards that we have in this deck one by one, and I will give you the reasoning as to why we have these cards and what the general strategy is overall for this deck, and how the cards kind of fit into that synergy. So the first card that we have here is for 0 mana, is a Backstab. Deal 2 damage to an unnamed minion. It's a great rogue card. It's a basic card, so it's free. And it's one of those primary control cards that we have in this mill deck, where we can use it to take out an aggressive minion that our opponent has without consuming mana, which we would need to execute our mill strategy. We also, at 0 mana, have Shadow Step, which returns a friendly minion to your hand and makes it cost 2 less. I will explain later on how this synergizes with the minion that we use to execute the mill strategy. But just keep in mind, I'll go back to this card a bit later on. And at 1 mana, we have a basic card, Voodoo Doctor, which is a 2/1 and a battle cry that restores 2 health. So this is a decent card for stalling. If we're desperate, we can use Shadow Step on it to restore more health. The 2/1 body trades evenly with 3/2 minions, which normally cost 2 mana. And if our opponent's playing an aggressive deck, he or she will most likely have a fair amount of 3/2 mana minions. So this is a nice card that only costs 1 mana, doesn't stop us from, doesn't consume a lot of our mana, so we still are able to use the rest of our mana pool to play other control spells, and we can use it to trade with a larger minion essentially. Then at 2 mana, we have Eviscerate, which deals 2 damage. Combo deals 4 damage instead. Also a great control card. We have a few 0 mana and 1 mana cards that help to activate this card's combo. And if we can do 4 damage for 2 mana, it's generally a lot. It's generally very high value, because 4 damage is usually enough to take out a 3 or 4 mana minion, which our opponent plays. So this card is a very mana efficient card most of the time that we play it. Which is why we have 2 copies of it in this deck. In fact, just about all rogue decks will run 2 copies of Eviscerate. Next, we have Gang Up, which basically this is a Blackrock Mountain adventure card, and it's a key part of the mill strategy. I will explain later. But what it does is you can choose a minion. It doesn't have to be your minion. It can be your opponent's minion, and shuffle 3 copies of it into your deck. And what this does is that it makes your deck size bigger than your opponent, because when you shuffle 3 copies of a card into your deck, essentially that means that your deck size increases by 3, which means that if you're put into a situation where you're both rapidly drawing through your deck, this card means that your opponent run out of cards 3 turns before you, at least. So this is why we have 2 cards of this deck. This is why it's such an integral part of Mill Rogue. And the ideal target for this card. Even though you can target some of your cheap minions, you can target bigger minions that our opponent has. But the key target to this deck will be the Cold Light Oracle, which I will get to later. It costs 3 mana, and it's also the key target for the Shadow Step card that I went through earlier. Next at 2 mana we have Sap, return enemy minion to your opponent's hand. This is a fantastic card to return a big minion that our opponent has. Essentially, the idea behind this card is to get a mana efficient trade. So Sap costs 2 mana. Ideally, you want to return a minion that our opponent has that they played for more than 2 mana. Essentially, they played maybe like a 5 to 7 mana minion, then Sap is definitely worth the value. Even more so if our opponent already has 10 cards in their hand. Returning a minion to our opponent's hand when it's already full will essentially kill the minion. So something to keep in mind when playing mill decks is that it requires a fair bit of thinking. A lot of times, you want to make your opponent have a full hand in your turn before you start returning minions to their hand, because it essentially kills off that minion. So this is a great card, and also why we have 2 of it in this deck. The low mana cost means that we have plenty of room to play other stuff in the same turn as well. Then at 2 mana we have Acidic Swamp Moose, which battle cries destroy your opponent's minion. It's a 3/2 for 2 mana, so it trades up against 3 mana minions pretty well. The battle cry is a very important part of this card, and why it was chosen is because, as a mill deck, there's not much we can do about our opponent's weapon. This card means that, if we're up against something like a weapon warrior, a pirate warrior, sorry, or maybe a shaman with Doomhammer. This card, having 2 copies of this card in our deck, allows us to mitigate some of that damage, because when we do mill our opponent and force them to draw cards, they will draw a lot of cards, and if they have cheap weapons, they will draw those cheap weapons. So this card is kind of like that. Mm, preventative measure in case we just happen to be versing a deck that relies on using their good weapons. And it costs 2 mana as well, which is low mana cost and doesn't interrupt our combos. We can also return it used to our hand using Shadow Step in case we need to destroy another weapon. Next at 2 mana we have Loot Hoarder, which is a 2/1 Death Rattle Draw card. This is just a quick cycle card that we have in this deck. Its low cost and ability to trade up against 3/2 minions while generating value is the primary reason why we have in this deck. Now, one thing that's might seem a bit weird is that the Death Rattle actually makes us draw a card, which seems a bit weird considering we're actually trying to make our opponents draw a lot of cards. But one thing that you need to consider is that while this card generates a card for us, makes us draw a card, what we do have is, because we have 2 gang up copies in this deck, we should have a 6 card advantage over our opponent. So if we did manage to play this card and get the Dressel trigger for both Loot Hoarders in this deck, we still have a 4 card advantage over our opponent. The other reason why this card is in this deck and why we want to do a bit of cycling to pick up is because we do need to pick up our key card, which is the Cold Light Oracle and the Gang Up that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, next at 2 mana we also have Youthful Brewmaster, which battle cries return the friendly minion from battlefield to your hand. This is perfect for returning the Cold Light Oracle, which is the key card for this deck. Can also return Acidic Swamp Moose, can also return the Voodoo Doctor from earlier, but also don't be afraid to play this card, even when you don't have any other minions, because a 3/2 body for 2 mana, does have a bit of presence, does put a bit of presence on the board, and allows us to take out potentially a bigger minion, or at least it will absorb some of the damage which your hero would have normally taken. So this is just a nice value card for its stats that has a bonus ability which allows it to synergize with the mill strategy that we have. Then at 3 mana we have Shadow Strike, deal 5 damage to an undamaged character. Important to note that you can target your opponent's hero portrait with it. The fact that it deals 5 damage for 3 mana is great value because it can take out 4 and 5 mana minions that our opponent plays. So it's just overall a good value card for this deck. And because we're playing a mill deck, we do need high value spells and minions because the cards that we use to actually force our opponent to draw cards actually have quite low value for their mana costs. So having the rest of the deck, make up for that is essential in a mill deck. Then at 3 mana, this Cold Light Oracle. This is the key card for Mill Rogue, and even if you're playing like a Mill Druid, there's a few of those going around as well. It's 3 mana card, and the battle cry makes each player draw 2 cards. Now, this is a card that you ideally want one of in your starting hand if you can afford it. If you're playing against an aggressive deck, maybe you want to mulligan it to get a 2 mana minion or 1 mana minion or some sort of control spell which will allow you to stay alive longer. But most of the time, you want this card in your starting hand, and most of the time, you want it to stay alive, and you want to return it to your hand so that you can kind of essentially play it again and again. One thing to note is that the thing is about Cold Oracle is that you only have 2 copies in your deck. The likelihood of you picking up both, is not that high, because aside from this, we don't have many other card draws aside from this and aside from the Loot Hoarder. So if you play a Cold Oracle, you force both you and your opponent draw 2 cards, and your opponent kills it, you could be waiting a long time before you pick up the next one, and you could be dead by then. So it is imperative that we combo the Cold Light Oracle with immediately on the same turn with another card after that, in order to keep the momentum of our mill strategy. So an example would be we play Cold Light Oracle for 3 mana. Both players draw 2 cards. We immediately follow up with a Shadow Step on our Cold Light Oracle to return it to our hand. And what this does is mean that our opponent can't kill it. We can play it again next turn, and that increases the chance of us drawing our other Cold Light Oracle. Same strategy with the Youthful Brewmaster, except that the Youthful Brewmaster costs 2 and doesn't reduce the mana cost of our oracles, so we can only do a Cold Light Oracle Youthful Brewmaster combination on turn 5. One thing to note is that when you do play a Cold Light Oracle followed by a Youthful Brewmaster, the only thing you end up with on the board is a 3/2 body, which is a pretty low value mana minion for 5 mana cost, because normally for 5 mana you want something like a 5/5. So in this case, yeah, when we do execute our mill combo, we don't put very valuable minions on the board, and that's why, like I said before, it's important that the control spells that we have, make up for that value loss. Mm. The other thing that we do, and we should aim to do this in this deck, is that when we play the Call Out Oracle, you want to immediately follow up in the same turn with a Gang Up. And what this does is it shuffles 3 more Call Out Oracles into your deck. Now, if you play a Call Out Oracle and then play Gang Up, that means that you will have, once you shuffle the 3 copies to your deck, you'll have 4 copies of Call Out Oracle left in your deck. And at that point, maybe you can afford to leave this on the board without returning it to your hand and just let it die, because by having 4 left in your deck, um, it significantly increases the chance of you drawing it later in the game, and you hopefully won't be dead by the time you draw another one of your 4 copies. So this is the integral part of this deck, and as you play this mill deck, you want to make sure that you get this card's battle cry to trigger off as many times as possible. And also, you want to keep close track of how many cards your opponent has in their hand, because if you see them have 10 cards in their hand and you have this card, then when you play it, each player draws 2 cards. The 2 cards that they draw will both be removed from the game, because you can't have more than 10 cards in their hand. Also, you should remember to take account of your own hand size, because this does make you draw 2 cards as well. You do not want to play this card, when you have a full hand, and then end up discarding something that's very important, like a Shadow Step or a Gang Up, or possibly your other Cold Light Oracle. That would be a disaster. So sometimes, you want to play, something like a Backstab on a minion, even though you won't kill it, or sometimes you want to put down the Voodoo Doctor just to keep your hand size low before you play your Cold Light Oracle. Mm. But if you do manage to execute this combo and get momentum, essentially the ideal situation would be like your Cold Light Oracle uh, draws you into more Cold Light Oracles. You gang up, copy it again. You draw more Cold Light Oracles. You Shadow Step, Cold Light Oracle again, and you just keep on doing that. And by the end of the game, you should have 6 to 8 more cards than your opponent does in their deck, so they will start taking fatigue damage a lot earlier than you, and that will allow you to win the game. But we do have some other cards in this deck to help us execute this strategy. One of them is this one, the Earthen Ring Farseer, 3/3 for 3 mana with Battle Cry, restore 3 health. This card helps to stall time. 3/3 body for 3 mana is okay. Again, it will trade up against 2 mana and 3 mana minions. We can also Shadow Step it um, in order to trigger the heal ability again, or use Brewmaster it and return it to our hand to do the same thing. One thing that's important is that even though we have a lot of small minions in this deck, we should exclusively save this gang up card for the Cold Light Oracle, because what happens is that if we put more copies of, say, something like an Earthen Ring Farseer or Voodoo Doctor in our deck, it essentially becomes a useless card later on in the game. This is a good card to put on turn 1 or turn 2, not so great on turn 15 when you draw a Voodoo Doctor that you've copied with Gang Up. So you should save up this card exclusively for the Cold Light Oracle. But you shouldn't hesitate to return some of your other minions like Earthen Ring Farseer, Acidic Swamp Ooze, or even the Voodoo Doctor to your hand with one of these cards, just to get the ability to go off again. Because sometimes that's what you need to do in order to keep the game going and survive. Anyway, next card after the Earthen Ring Farseer is our SI7 Agent. So this is a great value card, 3/3 for 3 with a combo that deals 2 damage. Combines great with cards like Backstab. Don't hesitate to Shadow Step this card if that's what you need to do to clear the board, because that could essentially means, on turn 5 you can play the SI7 Agent twice and deal 4 damage to a minion, which is a great tempo play. So yeah, this is a great card that you have. Do not cast Gang Up on it, as tempting as it seems. This card is a great card on turns 3 to 5, not so great on turns 10 and above. But in the early stages of the game, this is definitely a card that will slow down our opponent's aggression. Then at 5 mana, we have 2 copies of Assassinate. This is a basic rogue card, and you might ask, why are we having Assassinate in this deck in our strategy to mill our opponent out? Well, the thing is, there are cards that our opponent plays, with battle cry abilities that could essentially ruin, our mill strategy. Case in point being Cthulhu. You can sap Cthulhu if you want. It's not a great idea because you just play it again next turn, and maybe if it's a 15/15 Cthulhu, you're going to take another 15 damage. So that's not a great idea. So this card is exclusively saved for those minions our opponent plays, which we do not want to return to our opponent's hand because they have some kind of stupid battle cry ability or some kind of really strong battle cry ability, which would make us want to kill it immediately. And we do have 2 copies of it in this deck because we need this card to be in our hand when our opponent's key card is in his hand. Because when you do mill, when we do mill our opponents, they are drawing cards, we're drawing cards. If he's playing a Cthulhu deck, he will draw his Cthulhu because we are making him essentially empty his entire deck. You can't rely on oh, we'll just make him fill up his hand and then he'll discard Cthulhu, because as much as that is an ideal scenario, it actually has a low chance of happening only. So we have to be prepared for the fact that our opponent is going to drop his best minion on the board, and we have to have a solution to deal with it, which is Assassinate. Another thing that we have is Banish, and this is the last card in our deck, and this is such an important card in our deck. What it does is it returns all minions to their owner's hand. And this is a great card because what happens is if our opponent has 10 cards in his hand and he's basically his hand is full and he has like something like 5 minions on the board, when we cast Banish, all those 5 minions will die essentially, which makes it a fantastic card And also, if we use banish, and return all our opponent's minions to his or her hand, and his hand is full, then next turn when he draws a card, that card will disappear, will die, and then the contents of what your opponents have because it was all the minions that you returned in the previous turn. Also, another thing is that it synergizes with a lot of our minions that we have. If we return a Voodoo Doctor to our hand, we can play it again next turn to heal us. If we return Acidic Swamp Ooze, we can destroy our opponent's weapon. Youthful Brewmaster synergizes with Cold Light Oracle. Ideally, if we return our Cold Light Oracle to our hand, then we can play it next turn to draw more cards and force our opponent to draw more cards. So something like a good turn 9 play would be something like, okay, we play Cold Light Oracle, everybody draws cards. We play Vanish, the Cold Light Oracle goes back to our hand. All our opponent's minions go back to his hand, and hopefully his hand is full. Some of the minions will die. And then the next turn, we can then play another Cold Light Oracle to draw 2 more cards, play some control spells, Shadow Step, etc., etc. So that's why Vanish is such a fantastic card in this deck, and it's a key part in this deck. It is the closest thing that we have in this deck to a board clear, and it is a basic card to boot. Anyway, this deck can be quite challenging to play, and it does require a lot of thinking. I don't think it's a very competitive deck, but it is fun when it gets going. So I hope that you watch some of the gameplay footage that I have, and you can see that once you do get the combo going, you can mill even something like a control warrior that has stacked up like 20 armor. You can make him run out of cards and die, and he or she can't do anything about it with this deck. That is the potential of this mill deck, of these kind of mill decks when they get going. And also, this deck doesn't have very many rare cards at all. I think the gang up comes from the first wing of Blackrock Mountains, so you only need 700 gold to unlock it, and you unlock a bunch of other great cards as well that can be part of other decks. And I think the only other rares that we have in this deck are the Cold Light Oracle and the SI7 Agent. Everything else is either basic or common, so it doesn't take much dust or many cards for you to build this deck and start having a lot of fun milling your opponents. This mill decks are not fantastic against aggressive decks, but they are great against some of the late game decks that might see druids or warriors play. You do have potential to beat aggressive decks, but it does take a lot of experience and a lot of management on when to play your Cold Light Oracles in particular, because you are feeding them more cards into their hand, and if all their cards cost 1 and 2 mana, then they're just gonna play it and empty their hand in the next turn. Also important to note is that you don't want to give away the fact that you are a mill rogue at the start of the game. There are other rogue archetypes like the Miracle Rogue, which is a lot more common than the mill rogue. So if your opponent has spells or minions that makes him draw cards, at the start of the game, you kind of want him or her to do that before you play your Cold Light Oracle, because every card that our opponent draws on his own, is making our job to mill the rest of his deck a lot easier. So you do want to hold back your Cold Light Oracle until the appropriate time. You don't want to play it on turn 3, because if you play it on turn 3, the Cold Light Oracle, our opponent will immediately go, oh no, this is a mill rogue. I better stop playing all my draw cards. And then it makes it very hard for you to empty the rest of our opponent's deck. Well, not very hard, but it makes it harder because they won't play their draw card spells or minions anymore. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this deck. Please watch the gameplay video just to get an idea, of how it works. I think I show you a game against a priest, and the next one against control warrior that has built up a lot of armor. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy. Any feedback, please leave it in the comments. Any suggestions for improvements or comments. I hope you guys have fun playing this deck. And if you have any other like expensive cards or legendaries that you want to add this deck to make it better, please do so. Give it a go. This is a very much a deck that can be played around with to reach the best composition. Cards like Voodoo Doctor to heal yourself. You can replace it with something like Sir Finley, if you have that legendary, or something else. Essentially, Acidic Swamp Ooze 2 mana 3/2 doesn't have to be in this deck. The only thing, the real key components of this deck is of course the Cold Light Oracle, Youthful Brewmaster, Shadow Step, Vanish. The rest can be played around with a lot. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.